Welcome back to block 4. Too hard? Let's do a workaround. Sometimes we just need a change of plan. This is the original block we were going to do. But when I looked at it in Electric Quilt 7, the name of it is really pretty, Love in a Mist. So what's wrong? Well, look at what it's saying here. You might not be able to make it out too clearly, but it's saying it's an advanced block. Why is it so hard? Well, why indeed? Look at all the Y seams. That's 4. Oh, and there's another 8 more. There's 12 Y seams we have to do. Not only that, but they're all on the bias. Change of plans. Let's design our own block that'll be a little easier. It still looks similar in that it's got the star look to it, and it's got a little background behind it. It just doesn't have all those Y seams. So as you're sitting there scratching your head and wondering, how are we going to do that? Why, with paper piecing, of course. To design this block, I first drew a 9-inch square on my paper. Then I drew horizontal and vertical lines midway in that square. And then I did perpendicular lines to each corner. The next thing I did was to measure in between each of the lines and find the midway spots and make a dot. A simple connection of the dots gave me my star shape. The last thing I needed to do was where the star goes towards the center, I measured halfway between that point and the outer square and drew a short line to connect the star. By doing that in all 4 locations, that formed the square that is the design behind the star. Another plus of this design, besides not having Y seams, is that each section only has 4 pieces to it. So you'll do 4 sections in one direction. Then you're going to just turn around and flip that pattern over the opposite way and mirror image it and stitch 4 more sections, and you'll be done. Pretty easy. Now we're ready to get started. The first thing you need to do is step 1 is print your pattern from your workbook on a plain piece of paper. You want to cut apart all the segments for the patterns. Now you need to choose your fabrics. You'll need 3 different types of fabrics plus a background. Please note that in order for this design to work, section A2, A4, B2, and B4 all need to be cut from your background fabric. In order to cut your fabric, you will need 4 layers of each segment from both the A group and the B group. So when you're layering your fabric, make sure all layers are facing down with the wrong side up. Trim around each pattern piece, leaving a 1/2 inch margin around each. The last step along the way is to print out 2 sheets of the foundation pieces on your lightweight stabilizer. Then you're going to cut the segments A and B apart. You should have 4 segments per page. You've got all your fabric pieces cut, and now we're ready to start stitching. So now we're ready to start. We're going to take piece A1 and A2, and we're going to put them right sides together, just as if we were going to stitch it normally. Now let's take off the labels. Here's where we differ from normal sewing for those of you who have not done paper piecing before. We're going to place those fabrics underneath our template. And we want to make it so it just extends past the A1 into the A2 at about 1/4 of an inch. Doesn't have to be exact, just approximately 1/4 of an inch. Now we're going to stitch on the line between A1 and A2. This is going to give us an absolute perfect 1/4 inch seam. And later on you'll see how our points all are exactly matching. The beauty again of paper piecing. So that's stitched. We're going to flip it over. And normally I get out the iron and I press, but these are such small seams and there's only 4 pieces. So we can finger press at this point and we'll be okay. Now if you'll see, we're really extending into the A3 section. So we need to do a little trimming now. So we're going to put our cardstock down on the line for A3, fold our template back. Then we're going to get our add 1/4 ruler and place it right against that fold and trim. That gives us a perfect 1/4 of an inch, and it also gives us a very good idea of where to put the next strip. So now we're going to do A3. We're going to stitch on the line just like we did before, finger press it open, and now we have 3 pieces done. Just like before, we're going to go back to the cutting mat and trim up this piece. Using the cardstock, flip it back, get the add 1/4 ruler out, and then we're going to trim. So the only thing that we have left to do is to put on A4. So we're going to line that up right side against the other fabrics that are already stitched down. I'm going to flip it over, sew on the line like we have before. And after that's done, we're going to finger press that open as well. Now we need to trim the entire block at this point, but first let's give it a good press so that we have nice crisp points when we're finished. With that being done, we're going to place our ruler against the dark line 1/4 of an inch away and trim the entire area around the block. Now in an area like this, if I weren't filming, I would have stopped and got a longer ruler, but instead I did it the hard way. I don't suggest doing what I'm doing there because my blade's open, and that was just an accident waiting to happen, so don't do that. I was just lucky. So now we're going to trim off these little points down here. And with that, our block is done. We have to make 3 more of section A and 4 of section B, and we'll be ready to move on. We are now ready to stitch section A and B together. The only really critical part of stitching these together is this section right here that I'm going to mark with a pin. You want to make sure that when you put the pin in on that side, that it's coming out exactly the same way on the other side. That'll guarantee that your points are going to be accurate. So we're going to go ahead and stitch this right on the dark line. That's why I like to keep the paper on the blocks until I'm completely done. Now don't start stitching right at the edge. Go up to where the line starts because we're going to have a lot of bulk right in the center seam. So start right at the line, not before it, and stitch up that seam. Remember, when you get to the pin, take it out. Don't stitch over it. Make sure that you remain straight with your fabric and your stabilizer and continue to stitch that seam all the way to the end. And you notice I locked off at the beginning and I'm locking off the stitches here at the end as well. We now have stitched section A and B together and matched for perfect points. Do that with the other 3 A and B sections. After you stitch these A and B sections together, make sure you press the seams open so that they lay nice and flat. And there's your 4 A and B sections all stitched together. Now we're ready to move on. We're going to take the top 2 A and B sections and the bottom 2 A and B sections, and we're going to stitch those together down the center. As before, you'll start the stitching 1/4 of an inch away from the edge of the foundation piece on the black line. Now we have 4 sections joined together. We're going to press the seams open like we did before so that they lay nice and flat. We're now ready to move on once again. We're going to put those 2 halves together to form one complete unit, and that will finish up our star. Make sure all your seams are pressed flat. There's your finished product. We did our workaround. It looks just as good as if we had done the other block. The only thing left to do now is to square that up to 9.5 inches, and it's done. Good job.